You have almost certainly been pouring the wrong whiskey your entire life. Not bad whiskey, wrong whiskey. The difference between a $2 million bottle of Scotch and the $40 handle next to it isn't age, and it isn't marketing. It's 8 things you've never been told. Here's every whiskey explained. Scotch. Scotch can only be made in one place on earth, Scotland, not because of tradition, because of law. The Scotch whiskey regulations of 2009 spell it out. Water, malted barley, oak barrels, minimum 3 years of aging, and every single drop has to mature inside Scotland's borders. Make it anywhere else, and it's not Scotch. It's just whiskey that wishes it were. Scotland breaks Scotch into 5 regions, and each one tastes nothing like the others. The Highlands, the Lowlands, Campbelltown, Speyside, and Islay. Speyside alone has over 50 distilleries packed into one stretch of land, more than anywhere on the planet. That's home to Macallan and Glenfiddich, 2 of the most recognized bottles in the world. Then there's Islay. If you've ever taken a sip of Scotch and thought someone had set your drink on fire, that's an Islay. Distilleries like Laphroaig and Lagavulin dry their barley over burning peat, and the smoke gets baked directly into the grain before anything else happens. The result tastes like a campfire wrapped in a Band-Aid. People are obsessed with it, or they try one sip and never go back. That bottle of Johnnie Walker sitting on every bar on the planet, it's a blend, malt and grain whiskey from multiple distilleries mixed together. About 90% of all Scotch sold globally is blended. The single malt everyone talks about is actually the minority. Irish whiskey. Ireland once ruled the whiskey world. Then it nearly ceased to exist entirely. In the 1800s, Ireland had over 100 working distilleries, and Irish whiskey was the dominant spirit globally. Then 4 disasters hit back to back. World War I gutted the industry. Irish independence cut off their biggest customer in the British Empire, American Prohibition wiped out the export market overnight, and a global trade war finished whatever was left. By the mid-1970s, only 2 distilleries were still standing, from over 100 down to 2 in under 80 years. Today, Ireland has more than 40 working distilleries again, and Irish whiskey is one of the fastest climbing spirit categories anywhere. Bushmills holds a distilling license granted in 1608 by King James I, the oldest licensed whiskey operation in the world. Ireland also produces one style that no other country has ever replicated. Pot still whiskey is made from a mix of malted and unmalted barley, raw, unprocessed grain thrown straight into the mash. That unmalted barley creates a creamy, spicy richness that Scotch can't touch, and bourbon doesn't attempt. Redbreast is the bottle that converted most skeptics. That triple distillation thing everyone repeats, not a law. Jameson and Bushmills both do it, but it's a tradition they chose, not a requirement. Bourbon. Bourbon has a rule that costs distillers a fortune and accidentally built an entire industry on the other side of the Atlantic. To be called bourbon, it has to be made in the United States from a grain mix that's at least 51% corn. That corn is exactly why bourbon tastes the way it does: thick, sweet caramel, and vanilla on the way down. But the rule that drives the price up is this: every drop has to age in a brand new charred oak barrel used exactly once. After that barrel holds bourbon, it can never hold bourbon again. So what happens to all those barrels? Scotland buys them by the millions. American law creates a disposal problem, and the Scots turn it into some of the most celebrated whiskey on the planet. One country's legal headache is another country's foundation. The myth that refuses to die is that bourbon has to come from Kentucky. It doesn't. Any state can make it. But Kentucky still produces 95% of the world's bourbon, and the reasons are geological. The water filters through limestone, stripping out iron that would make whiskey taste metallic. The summers are punishing and the winters are brutal, forcing whiskey to push in and out of the wood faster than nearly anywhere else. That's where Buffalo Trace, Maker's Mark, Woodford Reserve, and Jim Beam all live. Bourbon also has an internal split that casual drinkers never see. The secondary grain, the one after corn, changes everything. Rye makes bourbon spicy and sharp. Swap it for wheat, and the whole character shifts. Softer, rounder, smoother on the finish. Maker's Mark is wheated. So is Pappy Van Winkle. the most hunted bottle in American whiskey, with some expressions reselling for thousands of dollars despite a sticker price under $100, a date almost everyone gets wrong. Congress declared bourbon America's distinctive product in 1964. The phrase America's native spirit didn't arrive until 2007, a Senate resolution 43 years later. Two separate moments that people keep collapsing into one. Tennessee whiskey. Jack Daniel's is technically bourbon, they just refuse to admit it. Tennessee whiskey meets every single federal requirement to carry the bourbon label. Everyone. But they don't use the word, because Tennessee whiskey sounds more interesting, and it sells better. What separates it is one extra step. Before the liquid ever touches a barrel, it gets dripped slowly through 10 feet of maple charcoal. That process, the Lincoln County process, acts like a filter, stripping out the harsh, oily edges and leaving something noticeably smoother. Jack Daniel's burns its own maple wood to make the charcoal fresh every time. In 2013, Tennessee passed a law making that process legally required for anything sold under the Tennessee whiskey name. The history behind the brand is darker than the bottle suggests. Jasper Newton Daniel learned to distill from two people, a preacher named Dan Call and an enslaved man named Nathan Green, known as Nearest. Nearest Green was the first master distiller at what became Jack Daniel's. The company didn't acknowledge his name publicly for more than 150 years. They finally did in 2016. Rye whiskey. 3 words: sharp, spicy, and nearly extinct. Rye has a peppery, borderline aggressive quality that makes it the backbone of classic cocktails: Manhattans, Old Fashions, and Sazeracs. But before bourbon took over, rye was America's original whiskey. Pennsylvania and Maryland were rye capitals of the entire world in the 1800s. Then Prohibition hit in 1920. 13 years of no legal alcohol. When it ended, American drinkers had moved on to lighter spirits, and rye was left behind. It nearly vanished. The only reason it exists today is that craft cocktail bartenders found it again decades later and hauled it back behind the bar. Old Overholt has been running since 1810, among the oldest continuously operating whiskey brands in America. Ulysses S. Grant reportedly drank it during the Civil War, and John F. Kennedy was a fan. Something that genuinely trips people up. Canadians call nearly all their whiskey rye, even when it's mostly made from corn, a century-old nickname with nothing to do with actual rye content. Japanese whiskey. In 2014, the whiskey world crowned a new king, and Scotland wasn't even in the room. Japanese whiskey started in 1923, when a businessman named Shinjiro Tori opened the Yamazaki distillery outside Kyoto. He hired a chemist named Masataka Taketsuru, who had spent years training inside actual Scottish distilleries and married a Scottish woman named Rita while he was there. Taketsuru came back to Japan carrying every technique Scotland had. He eventually left to build his own distillery in the cold northern island of Hokkaido. That became Nikka. For 90 years, Japan quietly refined its craft while the rest of the world looked elsewhere. Then critic Jim Murray scored the Yamazaki single malt sherry cask 2013 at 97.5 out of 100, the best whiskey on earth. For the first time in competition history, not one Scotch cracked the top 5. Bottles that had been sitting on shelves for $70 disappeared within weeks. Today, those same bottles sell for over $1,000, if you can find them at all. Japan also uses a wood called Mizunara oak, a tree that takes roughly 200 years to grow large enough for barrel production. Distilleries fight over the trees. The success came with a cost. Fake Japanese whiskey flooded the market, bottles designed to look Japanese that contained spirit made everywhere but Japan. In 2024, Japan's Whiskey Association drew a hard line. To carry the Japanese whiskey label, the product must use Japanese water, be distilled inside Japan, and age at least 3 years in Japan. Everything else gets reclassified as world-blended whiskey. Canadian whiskey, 600 blends, months of testing, purple velvet, and a crystal decanter on a royal train. In 1939, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth became the first reigning British monarchs to visit Canada. Samuel Bronfman, president of Seagram's, decided to mark the occasion with a whiskey created specifically for the royal trip. He tested around 600 different blends before settling on the right one, poured it into a crystal decanter, wrapped it in purple velvet, and loaded 10 cases onto the royal train. He called it Crown Royal. Since 1939, it has been exclusive to Canada up until the 1960s. Today, it's the best-selling Canadian whiskey in the United States. Canadian whiskey also carries a legal rule that sounds invented. Distillers can add up to 9.09% of other spirits or flavorings to the blend. Nobody has a clean explanation for why the number is 9.09 specifically. During Prohibition, Canadian distillers quietly ran massive amounts of whiskey across the border to a very thirsty American market. That relationship never ended. About 70% of all Canadian whiskey produced today still ships south. World whiskeys. The biggest story in whiskey over the last 20 years isn't Scotland, it isn't Kentucky, it's the countries that were never supposed to be in this conversation at all. India is now the largest whiskey market on the planet. Not by exports, but by how much the country actually drinks. Brands like Amrut and Paul John win gold at the world's most prestigious spirits competitions year after year. The secret is heat. India's tropical climate ages whiskey 4 to 5 times faster than Scotland. What takes 12 years in the Scottish Highlands, an Indian distillery pulls off in 3. The catch is called the angel's share, the portion that evaporates through the barrel every year. In Scotland, that's about 2% annually. In India, it hits 12. A barrel loses far more to the air, but what survives is ferociously concentrated. Taiwan's Kavalan distillery opened in 2005. 10 years later, their Kavalan Solist, Vinho Barrique, was named world's best single malt at the World Whiskies Awards in London. A 10-year-old operation beat countries that had been distilling for over 500 years. Scotland, Japan, everyone. Sullivan's Cove from Tasmania took the same title in 2014. Wales opened Pindrin after a 100-year gap. England got its first single malt distillery in over a century, when St. George's opened in Norfolk in 2006. Countries that had nothing to do with whiskey 20 years ago now own some of its biggest trophies. The labels. Pick up a bottle of whiskey and flip it around. Half the words on that label mean something completely different from what you think. Single malt sounds elite, and it usually is. But single doesn't mean one grain. It means one distillery. A single malt is 100% malted barley from one specific location. Blended Scotch is what most drinkers are actually pouring. Malt whiskey from multiple distilleries merged with grain whiskey to hit a consistent, affordable flavor. Cask strength skips the watering down entirely, bottled straight from the barrel. Standard whiskey lands around 40% alcohol. Cask strength can hit 65 or 70. One sip clarifies the difference immediately. Then there's bottled in bond, a label practically nobody outside hardcore whiskey circles recognizes, and it has one of the most unhinged origin stories in American food history. The Bottled in Bond Act of 1897 exists because whiskey producers were doctoring their product with tobacco juice, kerosene, and prune juice to fake quality. To earn the badge, a whiskey must come from one distillery, one distillation season, age exactly 4 years in a government-bonded warehouse, and bottle at exactly 100 proof, no exceptions. In January 2025, the US government quietly handed American whiskey its first new official category in 60 years. American Single Malt, 100% malted barley, one distillery, aged in oak, made entirely in the United States. Think of it as what happens when a Scottish idea collides with American geography, climate, and attitude. The category has existed for decades under the radar. Washington just finally gave it a name. Last thing, and this genuinely irritates serious whiskey drinkers. Color is meaningless. Scotch can legally add caramel coloring before bottling. That rich amber bottle could be food dye. Dark doesn't mean aged. Age doesn't always mean better. The barrel. The char on the inside of a bourbon barrel is graded from 1 to 4. Level 4 has a name, alligator char. The heat cracks the wood into a pattern that looks exactly like alligator skin. That char gives bourbon its vanilla and caramel flavor, pulling the spirit in and out of the wood with every temperature swing. Once a barrel has done that job, the char is spent, which is the entire reason American law requires a brand new barrel for every batch of bourbon. Every year, a portion evaporates straight through the wood. Distillers call it the angel's share, roughly 2% gone annually in Scotland's cool climate. There's also the devil's cut, whiskey that soaks so deep into the wood fibers it never escapes. Some distilleries have engineered ways to pull it back out, and while million-dollar bottles grab the headlines, the word whiskey has been around for over 500 years, from the Gaelic Uesge Bitha, meaning water of life. Even George Washington got in on it. In 1799, the year he died, his distillery at Mount Vernon produced nearly 11,000 gallons of whiskey. The average American distillery that year made around 650. The man who built a country was making 17 times more than anyone else. The barrel isn't the container, it's the recipe. Check out the next food breakdown on your screen now to see more videos like this one. Thanks for watching.